My name is Sarah. I'm 42 years old, and I discovered my in laws had packed suitcases with rope, sedatives, and fake passports, planning to kidnap my three children during a weekend babysitting visit. What I did next not only saved my family, but exposed a dark secret that had been festering for decades. It's a long and harrowing story, but it's one I feel compelled to tell. There's a strange comfort in sending your story out into the world, hoping it finds someone who understands. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It helps me feel a little less alone in this, knowing we're all connected for a moment. It all began on a Tuesday, a day so profoundly ordinary it felt offensive in retrospect. The late afternoon sun slanted through our kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was filled with the comfortable, chaotic symphony of family life. The scent of chicken roasting for dinner, the rhythmic thump of a basketball being dribbled outside by my husband, Robert, and the murmur of the television where our 5-year-old twins, Nathan and Noah, were engrossed in a cartoon. I was at the kitchen table, patiently guiding our 7-year-old daughter, Olivia, through the labyrinth of long division. Her brow was furrowed in a perfect miniature of her father's when he was concentrating, a detail that always made my heart ache with love. This was my world, my sanctuary. A life not built on grand achievements or a high-flying career, but on these small, precious moments. The scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the shared laughter over a silly joke. It was a life I had nurtured and fiercely protected, especially from the cold indifference that emanated from one particular corner of our extended family. Then the phone rang, its shrill summons slicing through the domestic peace. I glanced at the caller ID on the counter and felt a familiar, subtle tightening in my stomach, a reflexive bracing for impact. Margaret Wilson, my mother-in-law. "I'll get it," I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I walked into the relative quiet of the hallway, taking a deep, fortifying breath before swiping to answer. I summoned the voice I reserved just for her. Polite, pleasant, and with an unbreachable wall of distance around it. "Hi, Margaret. How are you?" "Sarah, dear, I'm simply wonderful. I was just sitting here thinking about you and Robert and our beautiful grandchildren." I waited, my internal alarms already on high alert. Margaret never just called to think about us. In the 15 years I had been married to her son, her calls were purposeful, transactional events, usually to dictate holiday schedules or to subtly inquire about Robert's latest salary increase or promotion prospects. "Your anniversary is coming up, isn't it? 15 years. My goodness, what a milestone. It feels like just yesterday Robert was bringing you home to meet us." "It is, yes, the 15th, I confirmed, my guard rising higher. I could hear her mentally calculating, assessing. "Well," she paused for dramatic effect, "we decided we would be absolutely delighted to take the children for that entire weekend. You two should go away, go to a nice hotel, have some romance. You've earned it. Let us handle everything." The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in her immaculate museum-like living room. I was utterly, completely stunned. My mind scrambled, trying to find a precedent for this offer, and came up empty. In 15 years, Margaret and Gerald had never once offered the babysit. Not when Olivia was born and I was a walking zombie, weeping with exhaustion. Not when the twins arrived, a 2-for-1 shock to the system that nearly broke us. Not for date nights, not for work emergencies, not for the time I had the flu so badly I couldn't lift my head from the pillow. Their version of grandparenting was a performance enacted on major holidays with expensive, impersonal gifts and comments on how tall the children were getting, as if they were measuring saplings they'd planted in someone else's yard. "Well," she paused for dramatic effect, "are you there, dear? Did you hear me?" "Yes, I'm here," I finally managed, my voice sounding strained and distant to my own ears. That's That's an incredibly generous offer, Margaret, but we couldn't possibly impose on you like that. It was the standard polite American refusal, the one that should have been accepted with a, "Oh, it's no trouble at all, but I understand." But Margaret wasn't playing by the usual rules. Nonsense! It's not an imposition, it's my right. I deserve time with my grandchildren. You've kept them from me for too long, Sarah. The accusation, wrapped in the guise of a loving grandmother's plea, landed like a slap. I had kept them. I, who had sent years of invitations for school plays, soccer games, and Sunday dinners, only to be met with a litany of vague, dismissive excuses. Robert had come inside, drawn by the unusual length of the call. He saw the look on my face and mouthed, "What's wrong?" I covered the receiver with my hand. "Your mother. She wants to babysit the kids for our anniversary weekend." His eyebrows shot up in astonishment, and then a slow, hopeful smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hope, a look I hadn't seen in years when it came to his parents. It was the look of a boy who still, after all this time, wanted his parents' approval. "Well," Margaret's voice crackled with impatience, "what do you say?" "That's so kind. Let me just talk it over with Robert, and I will call you right back." As soon as I hung up, Robert's face was alight. "Wow, I mean, can you believe it? Maybe they're finally coming around, Sarah. Maybe they're trying." "Or maybe pigs are flying," I muttered, unable to help myself. I immediately regretted the cynical words when I saw the hope dim slightly in his eyes. "Come on," he said softly. "Don't be like that. Look, my dad, he told me on the phone last week that he hasn't been feeling well. He brushed it off, you know, how he is. But maybe it's a wake-up call. Maybe they realize life is short and they've missed out." I looked at my husband, at the earnest plea in his eyes, and my heart fractured. He wanted this so badly. He wanted the doting, involved parents that I had, the ones who would drive 3 hours in a snowstorm to see their granddaughter in a 5-minute school play. He saw his parents' offer as an olive branch. I saw it as a Trojan horse. But how could I be the one to burn it to the ground before he even had a chance to accept it? "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. It felt like a betrayal of every instinct screaming inside me. "Okay, Rob, we'll let them." His face broke into a wide, relieved grin. He pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "This means more to me than you know." But as I stood there, wrapped in his arms, a chilling premonition washed over me. I had just agreed to hand my children over to two people who had treated them as inconvenient accessories for their entire lives. And a cold, determined voice in the deepest part of my soul whispered, "You will not be leaving them alone. This isn't a visit. This is a reconnaissance mission." The decision settled in my stomach like a lead weight for the rest of the week. Outwardly, I played the part of the happy, appreciative wife. I helped Robert research charming bed and breakfasts in the wine country, feigning excitement over photos of rustic rooms and menus from Michelin-starred restaurants. To Robert, this was the dawn of a new era for our family, a chance to finally mend the fractured relationship with his parents. To me, it felt like I was meticulously planning a counterintelligence operation. My first call, made from the privacy of my locked car in a grocery store parking lot, was to my best friend, Jessica. An ER nurse with a razor-sharp wit and zero tolerance for nonsense, she was my anchor in the sea of Wilson family dysfunction. "You're not going to believe this," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Margaret Wilson just offered to babysit the kids for an entire weekend." There was a long, charged silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," Jessica said finally, her voice low and serious. "That's not just a red flag, Sarah. That's a 5-alarm fire with a full hazmat crew on standby. What in the world is going on?" "Robert thinks they're trying to turn over a new leaf. His dad's been unwell, and he's seeing this as some sort of deathbed reconciliation tour." "And you, the woman with the most finely tuned BS detector I know, what do you think?" I let out a long, shaky breath. I think my gut is screaming bloody murder, Jess, but you should have seen his face. He looked like a little boy on Christmas morning. I couldn't crush him. So I agreed. You agreed? She yelped. I agreed to let them come to the house, I clarified quickly. I did not agree to actually leave, but I need you in the loop. I need someone on the outside who knows the situation just in case my gut is right and things go sideways. Consider me on high alert, she said, her voice shifting into its familiar, competent nurse mode. I'll keep my phone on loud all weekend. You call or text with a code word, pineapple, and I'll call 911 for a wellness check. No questions asked. Got it? Got it. Pineapple. The absurdity of it would have been funny if I wasn't so terrified. My next call was to my own mother. She was the epitome of a loving grandmother, her home filled with the children's artwork, her calendar marked with their school events. She listened patiently as I laid out the bizarre situation. Well, that's certainly a surprise, honey, she said, her tone carefully measured, but I could hear the underlying concern. Mom, I have a terrible feeling about this. It feels wrong. It feels predatory. The word slipped out before I could stop it. Then you listen to that feeling, Sarah Jane, she said, using my full first name like she did when she was deadly serious. A mother's intuition is the most powerful, God-given tool on this earth. It has kept babies safe since the dawn of time. You do not ever doubt it. I know, but I'm in a tricky spot with Rob. So here's my crazy idea. Would you and Dad consider coming into town that weekend? You don't have to see anyone. Just get a hotel room nearby. I just need to know my own Calvary is a 10-minute drive away. We're already packing, she said without a moment's hesitation. You just call, day or night. Hanging up, I felt a small measure of control return. I was building a fortress around my family, brick by brick. The final piece of my intelligence gathering involved Robert's younger sister, Chloe. Their relationship was a source of quiet pain for Robert. Chloe had moved to California after a bitter divorce years ago and kept her distance, her visits fleeting and strained. Robert blamed it on the miles, but I always sensed a deeper, more deliberate severing of ties on her part. At my gentle insistence, Robert called Chloe to share the good news. I sat beside him on the sofa, watching his face as he spoke. Hey, Chloe. Yeah, I know, it's been too long. Listen, you are not going to believe this. Margaret and Dad have offered to watch the kids for our anniversary. Yeah, can you believe it? I think they're really making an effort. He fell silent, listening to her response. His hopeful smile began to falter, slowly replaced by a look of confusion. Oh, right. Well, that's okay. Yeah, you have a good one too. Talk soon. He hung up the phone and stared at it for a long moment. That was one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had. What did she say? I asked, leaning forward. She didn't say much of anything. She just said, oh, well, that's unexpected. And then she made some excuse about having to go. But her voice, Sarah, it was so tight. It was like she was afraid to talk about it. She sounded scared. He tried to rationalize it, blaming it on a bad day at work or stress, but the seed of doubt was planted. Chloe's strange, fearful reaction was another blaring alarm. This wasn't an olive branch. This was something she recognized, something she had run away from. The days leading up to that Saturday were a surreal performance. I was the doting wife finalizing our fake getaway plans, while secretly, I was a general preparing for battle. I packed the kids' overnight bags with their pajamas and toothbrushes, but in the trunk of my car, hidden beneath a blanket, was my own go bag. Changes of clothes for all 3 children, their favorite stuffed animals, copies of their birth certificates and social security cards, and a list of important phone numbers. I even took recent photos of each of them on my phone and emailed them to Jessica and my mom with the subject line, just in case. I was no longer just paranoid. I was prepared. I would let the Trojan horse through the gates of my home, but I would be waiting inside, sword in hand, ready to find out exactly kind of soldiers were hiding in its belly.
Miles away, in a house that was less a home, more a mausoleum of pristine furniture and polished resentments, a far more sinister kind of planning was reaching its endgame. The air in the Wilson home was always still, scented with lemon polish and the faint, metallic tang of unspoken bitterness.
Gerald Wilson sat huddled in his oversized leather armchair, a cashmere blanket draped over his increasingly frail legs. A dry, rattling cough, the kind that speaks of deep-seated trouble, shook his thin frame. On the mahogany side table, a medical report lay face up, its stark, clinical words a death sentence he reread daily. Metastatic adenocarcinoma. Palliative care recommended. Prognosis, 6 to 8 months. The diagnosis hadn't softened him, it had made him brittle, desperate. And it had ignited a terrifying methodical fire in his wife. Margaret stood by the ornate fireplace, a notepad in her hand, her posture as rigid as a drill sergeant's. She was not a woman who succumbed to grief. She was a woman who strategized against it, who saw emotion as a tactical disadvantage. "Everything is in place," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment. She ticked an item off her list with a sharp, decisive flick of her pen. "The offshore accounts are funded and untraceable. The house in San Miguel is secured, paid in cash for the first 8 months, so there's no paper trail. The passports are masterpieces. Lou can't even tell they're not government-issued." Gerald was seized by another coughing fit, a weak, wet sound that left him breathless. It's a lot, Maggie," he wheezed, wiping his mouth with a silk handkerchief. "It feels so extreme." Margaret's head snapped toward him, her eyes, usually a pale, washed-out blue, flashing with a cold, hard light. "Extreme? I'll tell you what's extreme, Gerald. What's extreme is allowing your bloodline, your entire legacy, to be raised and molded by that woman, that cold, condescending woman who thinks her family's folksy, middle-class values are superior to ours. She has systematically poisoned our son against us. She hoards those children like they are her personal property, doling out access to us as if she were a queen granting an audience. She is their mother, Maggie," he whispered, the words barely audible. "And I am their grandmother," she retorted, her voice rising, sharp and piercing. "They carry your name, the Wilson name. What happens when you're gone, Gerald? Have you thought about that? Who will ensure they know who they are, what they come from? She will erase us. It will be as if we never existed. Her parents, with their potlucks and their cheap Christmas sweaters, will become the children's history. Is that the end you want? To have your funeral and then be nothing but a forgotten photograph on a dusty shelf?" Her words were surgical, expertly targeting his deepest fears. Gerald's terror wasn't of dying itself, but of ceasing to matter. He had spent his entire life building a successful accounting firm, accumulating wealth, all for the abstract concept of the Wilson name. He didn't see his grandchildren as vibrant, unique individuals. He saw them as the final, living vessels for his life's work, his legacy. "No," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of his old authority. "No, that is not what I want." "Then this is what we do," Margaret said, her tone softening instantly, becoming persuasive, almost hypnotic. "We are not hurting them, my love. We're rescuing them. We're giving them the life they were meant to have, a life of structure, of quality, of real education. We'll homeschool them. We'll teach them Spanish, classical music, the importance of their heritage. In a few years, they won't even remember her. They will only know us. They will only know a stable, loving home." She moved to his side, placing a cool, dry hand on his shoulder. "This is our last chance, Gerald, our final opportunity to correct the course of our family, to claim what is rightfully ours before it's too late." He looked past her to the dining room table where the tools of their plan were laid out with chilling precision. The 3 small suitcases, one for each child, the neatly folded sets of clothes,
the bottle of children's Benadryl she had carefully opened and laced with a stronger, faster-acting sedative. The small black taser she had purchased at a gun show just for protection, in case Robert or that woman tries to be a hero. It all seemed so theatrical, so impossible. A fleeting image of Robert's face as a boy flashed in his mind. He had never been a warm father. He had provided, he had instructed, he had funded the best education, but he had never truly connected. He saw that same chasm now between himself and his grandchildren. But in the twisted logic born of fear and narcissism, this grand, desperate act wasn't a betrayal of his son. It was a correction. He was fixing Robert's mistake in choosing Sarah. He was taking back control of the family narrative. "What about the college fund?" he asked, a practical thought cutting through the haze. "Robert set up a substantial one." "I've already looked into it," Margaret said, dismissively. "It's too difficult to access without raising red flags. It's a loss we'll have to accept. Our own funds are more than sufficient to provide for them. This isn't about money, Gerald. It's about blood." He closed his eyes, the faces of his grandchildren swimming in the darkness. But he didn't see their real faces, the ones full of laughter and mischief. He saw 3 small blank slates upon which he could inscribe his name, his legacy. He nodded slowly, the movement almost imperceptible. "For the best," he whispered. Margaret smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. "For the best," she repeated, turning back to her list. The final preparations were complete.
The first few minutes were a masterclass in strained civility. Margaret attempted to engage the children, asking them questions about school with the feigned interest of a politician on a campaign stop. Her compliments were backhanded. "My, Noah, you're getting so tall. You have your grandfather's height, thank goodness." Gerald remained a silent, hovering presence by the door, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the exits, his knuckles white where he gripped the duffel bag. Robert, ever the hopeful diplomat, tried to bridge the chasm of awkwardness with cheerful chatter about our dinner reservation and the unseasonably warm weather. He was trying so hard, my heart ached for him. "Let me take that heavy bag for you, Dad," Robert said, finally moving towards his father and reaching for the duffel. "I'll just pop it in the guest room upstairs so it's out of the way." "No!" Gerald yelped, the sound sharp and panicked. He physically recoiled, pulling the bag back so abruptly that he stumbled. "I've got it. It has my medication in it, my pills. I need to keep it with me at all times." The excuse was pathetically flimsy, and his visceral, panicked reaction was a blaring siren in the quiet room. I saw Robert's hopeful smile finally dissolve, replaced by a deep furrow of confusion and concern. He looked from his father's terrified face to the bag, and then he looked at me. In that single shared glance, I saw everything shift. He was no longer just humoring my suspicions. He was seeing the strangeness for himself. The foundation of his lifelong hope was crumbling before my eyes. I gave him the slightest of nods, a silent confirmation. "You see it too, don't you?" We went through the charade of getting ready to leave. I walked Margaret through the bedtime routine, explaining which books the twins liked and that Olivia needed her nightlight on. She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing. We raised 2 children, you know. I think we can handle it." As I put on my coat and gathered my purse, I kept my eyes on Gerald. He had sunk into an armchair, placing the duffel bag on the floor beside him, his foot resting on it possessively, like a dragon guarding its hoard. He was attempting to look casual, but a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his upper lip, and his gaze kept flicking towards the front door. The moment had arrived. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear and adrenaline. This was it. There was no going back now. I had to know what was in that bag. I had to expose the rot beneath the floorboards of this happy family facade. I walked into the kitchen, my movements feeling both slow and rushed, like in a dream. I poured a tall glass of dark red cranberry juice. My hand was steady. My purpose was clear. I walked back into the living room. Robert was watching me, his expression a taut mask of dread and anticipation. He knew this wasn't about a last-minute drink. He knew I was about to set the world on fire. As I passed Gerald's chair, I executed a flawless theatrical stumble, my ankle appearing to twist beneath me. "Oh!" I cried out, my body lurching forward. The tall glass of juice flew from my hand, arcing through the air in a perfect ruby-red parabola before splashing directly onto the black duffel bag. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy. I'm mortified," I exclaimed, my voice a pitch-perfect symphony of horror and apology. I dropped to my knees, dabbing uselessly at the spreading dark stain with my bare hands. "Gerald, I am so terribly sorry. Let me get that cleaned up for you this very instant. We can't have it staining the fabric." "It's fine. Just leave it," Margaret snapped, her voice sharp, her composure finally shattering. No, I absolutely insist," I said, already lifting the surprisingly heavy bag. "It'll only take a minute in the laundry room with the spot cleaner and the hairdryer. I'll have it good and new before the stain has a chance to set." Gerald lunged from his chair, his face a mask of pure unadulterated panic. He shouted, "Leave it alone!" his voice cracking. But it was too late.
I was already on my feet, the damp, heavy bag clutched in my hands and walking with brisk, purposeful strides towards the laundry room off the kitchen. Honestly, it's no trouble at all, I called over my shoulder, not breaking my stride. Robert, my dear, brave Robert, finally understood. He moved without a word, positioning himself between his parents and me, a sudden solid barrier of flesh and bone. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "why don't you sit down? Tell me more about this health scare Dad's been having." I didn't look back. I walked into the laundry room, the key to my family's fate in my hands, and I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding with the terrifying absolute certainty that I was about to uncover a truth far worse than I had ever imagined. The laundry room door clicked shut behind me, and the sound was like a gunshot in the sudden, ringing silence. The small, sterile space felt like an airlock, a decompression chamber between the world I knew and the nightmare I was about to enter. The low rhythmic hum of the dryer was the only sound, a mundane contrapoint to the frantic pounding of my own heart. I leaned back against the door, the damp, heavy duffel bag clutched to my chest, and squeezed my eyes shut for a second, just to breathe. From the other room, I could hear the muffled sound of Robert's voice, deeper and more authoritative than I had ever heard it with his parents. He was talking about his promotion at work, about the stock market, about anything and everything to keep them occupied, to keep them pinned in the living room. He was buying me time. My brave, wonderful husband was holding the line. I placed the bag on top of the washing machine, its black canvas looking sinister under the harsh fluorescent light. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to clench them into fists to stop them. A wave of dizziness washed over me. What if I was wrong? The thought was a piercing, insidious whisper in my mind. What if the bag really did just contain Gerald's medications and some extra clothes? I would be the villain. I would be the paranoid, controlling daughter-in-law who had just deliberately destroyed any chance of a family reconciliation. Robert would be humiliated. I would have to apologize, to grovel. The thought was mortifying. But then another wave of images washed over me, stronger and more certain. Gerald's panicked eyes as he yelped no. Margaret's smile that never, ever reached her eyes. The 15 years of calculated indifference. Chloe's terrified, evasive voice on the phone. And my own intuition, that deep, primal certainty in my gut that had been screaming at me for a week. My mother's words echoed in my head. A mother's intuition is the most powerful force on this earth. Don't you ever doubt it.
I would rather be a paranoid fool than a grieving mother. I looked at the door. I could see Robert's shadow under it, a dark, unmoving line. He was still there. He was guarding me. He was trusting me, perhaps for the first time, over his own lifelong wish for his parents' love. He was choosing me. He was choosing us. That silent, steadfast presence on the other side of the door was the final surge of courage I needed. I turned back to the bag, my purpose solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a suspicious daughter-in-law anymore. I was a mother, protecting her young. My fingers found the zipper pull. It was cold and unforgiving against my skin. I took a deep, shuddering breath, held it, and pulled. The zipper slid open with a smooth, sickeningly quiet zip. I braced myself and looked inside. My brain stuttered. For a long, silent moment, it simply refused to process the information my eyes were sending it. The scene was too incongruous, too monstrous to comprehend in the context of my quiet suburban laundry room with its half-empty bottle of Tide and a stray pink sock on the floor. This was not a bag of medication and clothes. This was a predator's toolkit. Neatly coiled on top like a sleeping snake was a length of thick nylon rope. Beside it, a large roll of silver duct tape, its edge already peeled back for quick access. My blood ran cold, a sluggish, icy sludge in my veins. My shaking hand reached in further, past the initial layer of horror. I pulled out a box of children's liquid Benadryl. It felt too light. I fumbled it open. The bottle was inside, but the plastic safety seal around the cap was gone. The liquid inside seemed darker, thicker than it should be. A wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of the washing machine to keep from vomiting washed over me. What had they done to it? Beneath that, there were several standard-issue orange prescription pill bottles, but the paper labels, the ones that would bear a patient's name, a doctor's name, a pharmacy's location, had been meticulously scraped off, leaving behind a white papery residue. Only the name of the drug itself was visible: lorazepam, zolpidem. Adult-strength sedatives, powerful and dangerous. My mind flashed to my small, lightweight children. An adult dose could put them in a coma, or worse. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. My gaze fell to the bottom of the bag. There was a hard, dark shape wrapped in a faded dish towel. With a sense of dreamlike dread, I unwrapped it. It was a taser. A black, menacing piece of plastic and metal, its two prongs glinting under the fluorescent light. It was a weapon designed to incapacitate, to subdue. And then I saw them. The final, damning pieces of the puzzle tucked into the very bottom of the bag, the items that transformed this from a terrifying possibility into an undeniable, monstrous truth. 3 small, brightly colored suitcases, the kind a child would proudly wheel through an airport. They were folded flat to save space. One was blue with cartoon dinosaurs, one was pink with a sparkly unicorn, one was a matching blue, one for Olivia, one for Nathan, one for Noah. The air left my lungs in a silent, ragged gasp. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This wasn't a weekend visit. This wasn't a misguided attempt to reconnect. This was a meticulously planned abduction. They were going to take my children, my babies. They were going to drug them, restrain them if they resisted, and spirit them away into the night. The room began to spin, the white walls closing in on me. The hum of the dryer swelled into a deafening roar in my ears. The full, staggering weight of their deception, the years of feigned indifference that had lulled us into a false sense of security, the sudden smothering affection, the fake smiles, the store-bought cookies, crashed down on me. It was all a lie, a monstrous, elaborate, theatrical lie designed for one purpose: to get them through my front door, close to my children. And I had almost let them succeed. I had almost walked out that door. I had almost left my children alone with these monsters. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs and leaving me gasping for air in the silent, humming room. I stared into the open maw of that duffel bag, and the abyss of human darkness stared back. For a long, suspended moment, I was frozen, encased in a block of pure, paralyzing horror. The world narrowed to the objects in that bag, a profane collection that had no place in my home: the sinister coil of rope, the silencing promise of the duct tape, the insidious threat of the altered medicines, the cold violence of the taser, the heartbreaking finality of the tiny suitcases. Each item was a verse in a satanic poem, and together they told a story of unthinkable betrayal. Then the ice that encased me didn't just crack, it exploded. It shattered into a million pieces, and from the core of my being, a white-hot rage erupted, a fury so pure and powerful it was elemental. It was the primal, instinctual rage of a mother whose young are threatened, a force of nature that burned away every last shred of fear, every ounce of doubt, every lingering vestige of the polite, accommodating woman I had always tried to be. My hands, which had been trembling uncontrollably just moments before, were now eerily steady. My movements became sharp, precise, imbued with a terrifying clarity of purpose. I was no longer a victim stumbling upon a terrible secret. I was an avenger gathering her evidence. I reached into the bag. I didn't just look, I touched. I felt the rough texture of the rope, the smooth, cold plastic of the pill bottles. I pulled out one of the small folded suitcases, the pink one with the unicorn, and the bottle of lorazepam with its scraped-off label. I held them in my hands, one in each, like a twisted set of scales, weighing the evidence of their guilt. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, only that I could not stay hidden in this room with this monstrous truth. This secret had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light of my living room. I turned and threw open the laundry room door with such force that it slammed against the wall with a loud crack. The scene in the living room was a tableau of tension.
Robert was still on his feet, standing between his parents and the kitchen, his arms crossed over his chest like a sentinel. Margaret was pacing now, a tight, angry little circle in front of the fireplace, her face pinched with irritation. Gerald had half risen from his armchair, his hand clutching his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. They all froze and turned as I emerged from the laundry room, a warrior stepping onto the battlefield.
I said nothing. I walked slowly, deliberately, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden, dead silence. I walked to the polished wood coffee table in the center of the room, the table where my children did their homework and played board games. I placed the small, unicorn-adorned suitcase onto its surface. Then, I set the unlabeled pill bottle down beside it with a sharp, definitive click that echoed like a gavel in the silent room. I lifted my head and met my mother-in-law's gaze. "What?" I said, my voice a low, dangerous tremor, shaking not with fear but with a barely contained fury, "is this?" Margaret's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. Gerald sank back into his chair as if his strings had been cut, a strangled, wheezing gasp escaping his lips. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own execution. That's for the children's toys," Margaret stammered, her mind scrambling for a plausible lie but finding none. "To keep them organized, a little travel case for their things." The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, it was insulting. "And this?" I asked, my voice dropping even lower. I pushed the orange pill bottle forward with my index finger, sending it skittering across the table until it stopped inches from her hand. "Is this a toy too, Margaret? Is this for organizing?" Robert stared at the items on the table, his face a mask of ashen horror. The last stubborn vestiges of his denial were being systematically obliterated. He looked from the suitcase to the pills and then to his mother's panicked, guilty face. And in that moment, he finally, truly saw her for what she was. "What have you done?" he whispered, the words a ragged exhalation of breath. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a lament. And that's when the transformation happened. That's when the mask of the doting, misunderstood grandmother didn't just slip. It was ripped away. The syrupy sweetness evaporated, the feigned vulnerability vanished, and what was left was something chilling, hard, and reptilian. "We are doing what needs to be done," she said, her voice dropping, becoming cold, flat, and devoid of all emotion. "We are saving them." "Saving them?" I shrieked, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and incredulous. Saving them from what? From their home? From their school? From their friends? From their parents who love them more than life itself? "You call this love?" Margaret sneered, her lip curling as she gestured dismissively around my living room, at the scattered Legos and Olivia's school books on the table. "This is chaos. This is neglect. You've made them an afterthought in your busy, self-absorbed lives. Their college fund is probably the only thing you pay attention to. We can give them focus. We can give them structure. We can give them a real family." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of her words stole my breath. It was then that my fury gave me a new, terrible idea. I turned, strode back to the laundry room, and my hand closed around the cold, hard plastic of the taser. I walked back and placed it on the table beside the other items, a third piece in my museum of their depravity. "And I suppose this is to help them focus," I said, my voice dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. Gerald let out a choked, rattling sob. Robert took a physical step back, his hand flying to his mouth as if to stifle a cry. His eyes were locked on the weapon, the reality of its purpose crashing down on him. I turned my gaze to him, my own eyes pleading, begging him to see the truth, to act. "Call 911, Rob," I said, my voice finally breaking, the fury momentarily giving way to the terror underneath.
He didn't hesitate, not for a second. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with shock and adrenaline as he dialed the 3 numbers that would change our lives forever. As he lifted the phone to his ear, his voice a choked, broken whisper, I need to report a kidnapping plot. It's at my own house. The suspects, they're my parents. I stood my ground, a human wall between the monsters in my living room and the staircase that led to my 3 sleeping, innocent children. The battle for the truth was over. The war for my family had just begun. As Robert's panicked, fragmented words tumbled into the phone, a new, volatile energy ignited in the room. The charade was over. The thin veneer of civilization had been stripped away. We were no longer family members engaged in a bitter dispute. We were captors and prey, locked in a primal standoff in the heart of my own home. Margaret, hearing her son's voice on the phone with the police, let out a sound of pure, guttural fury, the cry of a cornered animal. "You foolish, ungrateful boy," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. She lunged towards Robert, her hands curled into gnarled claws, her face contorted into a mask of hatred. "She has turned you against your own mother, the mother who gave you life. Don't you dare touch him," I snarled, my voice a low growl I didn't recognize as my own. She recoiled as if she'd been struck. And in that moment of pure adrenaline-fueled chaos, as my mind raced faster than it had ever had before, I remembered. There was more proof, the most damning proof of all. My mind flashed back to the contents of the bag, to the papers that I had seen but not fully processed in my initial shock. While Robert was still on the phone, his back to the room as he repeated our address to the dispatcher, and while Margaret was momentarily stunned by my feral defiance, I darted back to the laundry room one last time. My hands dove back into the duffel bag, past the rope and the tape, my fingers searching frantically. They brushed against the crisp edges of paper. I pulled out a small stack of documents, held together by a simple, unassuming paperclip. On top were 3 pristine, official-looking passports. The covers were a deep, convincing blue. I flipped open the first one. My heart stopped. It was Olivia's smiling, gap-toothed school photo from last fall, but the name printed in stark block letters underneath was Emily Grace Wilson. I frantically flipped to the next one. It was Nathan's face, his expression serious, under the name Daniel Robert Wilson. The third was Noah, his chubby cheeks and bright eyes, listed as Samuel Gerald Wilson. They had renamed my children. They had stolen their faces and tried to systematically erase their identities, grafting their family names onto them like parasites. A wave of physical revulsion so strong that it made me gag wash over me. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was an act of annihilation. They weren't just trying to steal my children's bodies. They were trying to obliterate their souls. Beneath the passports was a single folded sheet of elegant cream-colored stationery. A letter. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was written in Margaret's neat, controlled, looping cursive, the same cursive that had adorned every birthday card filled with a crisp $20 bill.
We are taking back what is ours. You have had them long enough. Your selfishness, your career ambitions, and your clear disdain for this family have left us with no other choice. This is not a request. It is a necessity. Do not try to find us. Do not involve the authorities, or you will regret it. We will return the children only when they have been properly educated and understand who their real family is. This is a rescue, not a crime. I walked back into the living room, a warrior returning with the enemy's standard. I was no longer screaming. I was eerily calm, the kind of preternatural calm that descends in the eye of a hurricane. I held up the passports, fanning them out like a winning hand in a game of poker. "You were going to take them to Mexico, weren't you?" I said,
my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a statement, not a question. Margaret's face, already pale, went corpse white. She stared at the passports in my hand, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. She knew she was caught, irrevocably. "You had a house waiting in San Miguel, weren't you?" I continued, the pieces of their monstrous plan clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "You were going to homeschool them. You were going to teach them to forget us. You were going to wait until we were declared dead or had given up, and then you would have had full custody. You would have controlled their inheritance, their lives, everything. They would have had a better life," Gerald suddenly cried out from his chair, his voice a pathetic, wheezing wail that was a mixture of defiance and terror. "They are my legacy, my blood. They carry my name." "They are not your legacy," I roared, the sound of my own voice filled with a strength and fury I never knew I possessed, seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with power. And at that exact moment, as if on cue from a divine director, the first faint wail of distant sirens began to cut through the quiet suburban night. It was the most beautiful, terrifying sound I had ever heard. The sound of rescue. The sound of the end. Margaret's face crumpled. The cold fury, the reptilian resolve, it all dissolved, replaced with a sniveling, self-pitying despair. "You've ruined everything," she whimpered, looking at me with eyes full of pure, undiluted hatred. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I said, taking a step closer, the passports clutched in my fist like a weapon. "You did. You destroyed it the moment you decided your grandchildren were objects. You destroyed it tonight, right here in this room." The sirens grew louder, closer, a rising crescendo of justice until they were right outside our door. Flashing red and blue lights strobed through our windows, painting the walls of our living room in the colors of an emergency, turning the horrific domestic scene into a surreal, silent disco of reckoning. Robert hung up the phone and came to stand beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. He was shaking from head to toe, but he stood tall. We stood together, a broken but united front, as the heavy, authoritative knock of the police sounded on our front door. The truth was no longer a dark secret hidden in a duffel bag. It was here, exposed and ugly, under the cold, flashing lights of the law. The moment the two police officers stepped across our threshold, the atmosphere in the room shifted irrevocably. The chaotic, personal horror of a family imploding was instantly superseded by the calm, procedural reality of a crime scene. The air, thick with rage and fear just seconds before, became charged with a new kind of tension, the quiet, methodical weight of the law. They were a man and a woman, their faces professional and impassive, their movements economical and sure. Their presence was an overwhelming force of order in our maelstrom of chaos. Dispatch received a 911 call regarding a possible kidnapping attempt, the male officer said. His name tag read Miller, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room in a single comprehensive glance. He took in the entire scene. Me and Robert standing together, shaken but resolute. Margaret sobbing theatrically into her hands in a wingback chair. Gerald looking like a shrunken, terrified old man, his face the color of ash. And the damning tableau of evidence laid out on our coffee table. "Ma'am, sir, could you please step over here with me?" he said, gesturing to me and Robert. His partner, a calm, steady-looking woman, began speaking quietly to Margaret and Gerald, her voice low and firm, immediately taking control of them. We moved to the far corner of the living room, creating a space of relative sanity. I handed Detective Miller the fake passports and the chilling letter I had found. He read the letter first, his lips tightening into a thin, hard line. Then he examined the passports, his professional mask finally cracking for a fraction of a second as he looked from the smiling photos of my children to the false names printed beneath them. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw not just a police officer, but a person, a father, perhaps. There was a flicker of profound empathy in his eyes. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice quiet but firm, meant only for me and Robert. "Your actions tonight, your courage, you were very brave. You very likely saved your children's lives from a terrible ordeal." His words, that simple, official validation of my deepest fears, were the key that unlocked the floodgates. The adrenaline that had been holding me together for the past hour drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. A wave of convulsive sobs shook my entire body, tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry streaming down my face. Robert held me tighter, his own tears silently tracking down his cheeks. The next hour was a surreal, out-of-body experience. More officers arrived, filling our home with the quiet bustle of an official investigation. A forensics team in jackets began carefully, methodically bagging the evidence from the duffel bag, each item documented and sealed. Margaret and Gerald were separated, taken into different rooms for questioning. I could hear snippets of Margaret's voice, rising in shrill indignation, a waterfall of lies and accusations. She claimed it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that the items were for a camping trip, that I was an unstable, hysterical woman who was trying to turn her son against her. But the evidence spoke for itself. It didn't just speak, it screamed.
The full, horrifying scope of their plot was uncovered in the days and weeks that followed. The investigation revealed a conspiracy so meticulous, so deeply premeditated, it chilled even the most seasoned detectives on the force. They found the wire transfers to untraceable offshore accounts funded by a small inheritance Gerald had recently received from a deceased sibling. They found the signed rental agreement for the house in Mexico, paid for 8 months in advance in cash. They got a warrant for their computers and found their internet search history, a horrifying roadmap of their malevolent intentions. How to homeschool in Mexico, fastest driving route to San Miguel de Allende, countries with no extradition treaty with the United States, childhood amnesia symptoms, how to make a child forget their parents. They had been planning this for months, ever since Gerald had received his terminal diagnosis. This wasn't a spontaneous, desperate act of grief. It was a cold, calculated, evil conspiracy to erase us from our children's lives and steal our family. While the legal storm raged around us, our own personal one was just beginning. The night of the arrest, long after the last police car had pulled away and a terrifying, unnatural quiet had descended on our home, I went upstairs. The children, miraculously, had slept through the entire ordeal. I stood in the doorway of their rooms, a silent sentinel, watching the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of their small chests. Olivia, her long hair fanned out on the pillow, the twins tangled together in their bunk beds like a pile of puppies. They were safe. The words echoed in my mind, a mantra I repeated over and over. They are safe. They are safe. But the feeling wouldn't stick. I felt a terror so profound, so bone deep, it was like a physical illness. The what-ifs were a swarm of angry hornets in my mind. What if I hadn't been suspicious? What if I hadn't trusted my gut? What if I had spilled that juice on the other side of the room? What if I had walked out that door and driven away, smiling and waving? Robert came and stood behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. He didn't say anything, just rested his chin on my head, his body trembling against mine. We stood there for what felt like hours, two broken soldiers guarding a peaceful kingdom that had come within a breath of being conquered. The fundamental trust in our world had been shattered, and we both knew, deep in our bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The fight to save our children was over. The long, arduous war to heal our family had just begun. The weeks that followed were a disorienting blur, a fog of meetings with police officers, district attorneys, and child psychologists.
The outside world saw a sensational news story, a bizarre and shocking tale of grandparents from hell. Reporters camped out on our street. But inside the walls of our home, we were navigating the quiet, devastating aftershocks of the earthquake that had ripped our lives apart. Robert was a ghost of the man he had been. He moved through the days with a heavy, haunted silence, the weight of his parents' unimaginable betrayal crushing him. He was drowning in a toxic cocktail of grief and guilt. Grief for the parents he thought he had, and guilt for not seeing the monsters they truly were. Guilt for pushing me to give them a chance. Guilt for being their son, for carrying their name, their blood. He would sit for hours in his study, just staring at the wall, lost in a place I couldn't reach. He stopped sleeping, and when he did, he was tormented by nightmares. I tried to be the strong one, the anchor for him, for the kids. I focused on maintaining a routine, on projecting an aura of calm and safety for the children who, thankfully, remained blissfully unaware of the specifics of that night. But in the dead of night, when the house was finally still, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the image of that open duffel bag burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I would feel a phantom weight in my hands, the cold plastic of the taser, the terrifying lightness of the altered medicine. About a month after the arrest, while we were mired in the preliminary legal proceedings, we got an unexpected visitor. It was Chloe, Robert's sister. She had flown in from California without a word, appearing on our doorstep one afternoon looking small and fragile, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed with a sorrow that looked years old. "I am so sorry, Sarah, Rob," she whispered as soon as we opened the door, her voice cracking. We ushered her inside, the three of us sitting in a strained, heavy silence in the living room that still felt tainted to me. I had rearranged the furniture, but I could still see the ghosts of that night in their places. She took a deep breath and opened the large purse she was carrying. She pulled out a worn cardboard shoebox and placed it on the coffee table. "They never saw us as people," she said, her voice trembling with the effort to speak the truth aloud. "They were possessions. They were projects. They were extensions of them, and our purpose was to reflect well on them. When I wanted to marry my ex-husband, Mark, a good man, a kind man, but a carpenter, someone they deemed unsuitable for the family's image, they threatened me. They told me if I went through with it, they would find a way to sue for custody of any children we might have. They said they would hire the best lawyer and prove I was an unfit mother before I even had a chance to become one." Robert stared at her, his mouth agape. "They what? Why did you never tell me this?" "Because I was ashamed," she cried, "and I was scared. I thought it was just me. I thought that I was the one who was flawed, the one who couldn't please them." She opened the box. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, all written in Margaret's distinctive, elegant, looping cursive. "These are letters she wrote to me during my divorce," she explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When I was at my absolute lowest point, when my life was falling apart, I thought she was trying to help. But they're not letters of support. They're instruction manuals. They're filled with demands, criticisms about how my personal failure was reflecting poorly on them, on their reputation. How I needed to handle the custody arrangement to ensure their access to my son wasn't compromised." Robert reached out a trembling hand and picked up a letter from the top of the pile. He began to read it aloud, his voice a monotone of numb disbelief. "Chloe, your public display of emotion is a deep embarrassment to this family. You must understand that your choices are not and have never been entirely your own. They impact all of us. You carry the Wilson name, and it is your primary duty to uphold its dignity. Your focus should not be on your own selfish grief, but on ensuring the transition is managed in a way that protects our family's standing." He dropped the letter as if it had burned his hand. He looked at Chloe, his eyes filled with a dawning shared horror. "All this time," he whispered, "all this time I thought you just moved away because you didn't like me or Sarah. I thought you were angry with us." "I wasn't angry," she said, sobbing openly now. "I was escaping. I had to put an entire country between us to feel like I could breathe, to feel like my life was my own. But I was a coward, Rob. I should have told you. I should have made sure you and the kids were safe. I am so, so sorry." In that moment, watching my husband and his sister finally, tearfully sharing the hidden truth of their upbringing, I saw the final, crucial piece of the puzzle fall into place. This wasn't about Gerald's illness or a sudden, twisted desire to be grandparents. This was the end game of a lifetime of toxic ownership, a pathological need for control that had festered in the dark for decades. Robert reached across the table and took his sister's hand. He didn't say anything, but he held on tight. It wasn't a fix, it wasn't an absolution, but it was a beginning. The letters didn't erase the pain, but they provided a context, a validation that the sickness was in them, not in him. He was not responsible for their depravity. That night, for the first time in a month, Robert slept for more than 2 consecutive hours. The healing process would be a long, brutal uphill climb. It would require more than just lawyers and court dates. It would require us to completely dismantle our understanding of family, to sift through the toxic wreckage of the past, and find a new, stronger, and more honest foundation upon which to build the rest of our lives. 1 year later, the trial was a grim, surreal affair that had been picked apart by the national media. In the end, the evidence was too overwhelming, the premeditation too clear. Margaret and Gerald Wilson were sentenced to 18 years in a state penitentiary, with the possibility of parole in 9 with good behavior. A cold, clinical end to a lifetime of quiet tyranny. Gerald's cancer, in a twist of cruel irony, went into a surprising remission once he was receiving the structured medical care of the prison system. They sent letters, of course, long, rambling screeds filled with blame, self-pity, and accusations. We never read them. They went directly from our mailbox into the cross-cut shredder, turned into meaningless confetti. We didn't move. Many of our friends thought we were crazy to stay in the house where the horror had unfolded. But I refused to let them have that final victory. I refused to let them turn our home into a haunted house, a monument to their evil. So we reclaimed it. We exorcised their ghosts with life and with love. We repainted the living room a warm, buttery yellow that captured the morning sun. We bought a new, ridiculously comfortable sofa and christened it with a family movie night and spilled popcorn. We filled the house with so many new, happy memories that they slowly, painstakingly began to paper over the ugly scars of that one terrible night. The children, in the miraculous way of the young, were resilient. The twins, thank God, were too young to have any conscious memory of the event. Olivia, my sensitive, observant girl, had nightmares for months. She became anxious, constantly checking that the doors were locked. We found a wonderfully child therapist who gave her the tools to articulate her fears, to understand that what happened was not her fault. She helped Olivia understand that the love in our house was a fortress, stronger than any monster in the world. Slowly, the nightmares faded, replaced with dreams of unicorns and soccer games. Our lives found a new, quieter, more intentional rhythm. My parents were a constant grounding presence, their uncomplicated love a healing balm. Chloe and Robert spoke on the phone every single week, forging a real, honest sibling relationship for the first time in their lives, united by their shared survival. And Robert and I, we were different. The trauma had changed us, there was no denying that. It had scraped us raw, but it hadn't broken us. In a strange and unexpected way, it had forged us into something stronger, something more real. The last of his childish illusions about his parents had been burned away in the fire of their betrayal, and in their place was a fierce, unwavering devotion to the family we had created together. He saw me, truly saw me, not just as my wife, but as my partner, my protector, my equal. Today was our 16th wedding anniversary. There was no weekend getaway to the wine country, no fancy dinner reservation. We had quietly renamed the day. We no longer called it our anniversary. We called it our survival day. We spent the day at the beach, the same one we'd taken the kids to since they were babies. The sky was a vast, cloudless blue. My parents were there, patiently helping the twins build an elaborate sandcastle, complete with a moat and shell walls. Chloe, who had flown in for the occasion, was laughing as she and Olivia tried to get a brightly colored kite to catch the wind. I sat on a worn plaid blanket next to Robert, watching them, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. The sun was warm on my skin, and the sound of the waves crashing on the shore was a steady, soothing rhythm, a timeless promise of cleansing and renewal. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, his hand finding mine and lacing his fingers through my own. I watched as Olivia's kite finally caught a gust of wind, soaring high into the bright blue sky, a tiny, defiant speck of color and joy against the vastness. "I'm thinking," I said, slowly, the words coming from a place of deep, hard-won clarity, "that for most of my life, I believe that being a good person, a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, meant being accommodating. It meant keeping the peace even when it cost my own peace. I thought strength was about how much you could endure in silence." I turned to look at him, at the man who had walked through the deepest circle of hell with me and had come out the other side, his hand still holding mine. That night, it taught me something profound. It taught me that true love isn't about possession or control. It's about protection and respect. And it taught me that real strength isn't about quietly enduring mistreatment. It's about having the fierce, terrifying courage to draw a line in the sand and roar, "No more." My value isn't defined by how much I can give to people who don't deserve it. It's defined by the love I build and protect right here, in this circle.
He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're the strongest person I know, Sarah." "No," I said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching my eyes as I looked back at our family, our real family, laughing and playing by the water's edge. "We are." My name is Sarah. I'm 43 now, and I am a survivor. My family is a testament to the fact that you can't choose the people you're related to, but you can, and you absolutely must, choose the people you call family. The battle for our lives taught me that the most important inheritance you can ever leave your children is not a name or a fortune, but a legacy of love, resilience, and the unwavering courage to protect your own peace at all costs. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to fight to protect your boundaries, your children, or your own sense of self, please know that you are not alone. Your strength is real, your voice matters, and your peace is worth fighting for.